Also this morning, culturally significant items are on their way back to Ethiopia, more than 150 years after they were taken during a siege and taken to Britain. Also seized at that time was the 7-year-old Prince of Ethiopia, who has been interred at Windsor Castle since he died at the age of 18. Abby Kugathasan and her CBC News team had exclusive access to that handover event, and she has the story in London today.
The private ceremony was held just a short space away from Buckingham Palace. It included objects that were taken following the 1868 siege by British troops. There was a cup and a shield and a tableau that can't be on display as it's a religious artifact. These were all stolen objects, but there was also a lock of hair that belonged to the Crown Prince Alamayu. He was 7 years old when he was brought back to England along with thousands of stolen treasures. The hair was found by Leonie Turner in New Zealand. That's her great-great-uncle right there. He was the prince's guardian in Britain. She said it was only right that the hair be returned to Ethiopia. Now, this event featured individuals. We know institutions have been more reluctant when it comes to returns. Decades after the prince died of pneumonia as a teenager, Ethiopia did ask for Alamayu's remains to be repatriated. He'd been buried at St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. That request was made in 2007 to Buckingham Palace, but the palace refused, saying to move him would disturb other remains. I spoke with Dan Hicks, a professor at Oxford. He pointed out even members of the royal family had been moved after burial.
I think really the monarchy are being very badly advised. They're being told by people that this is those old arguments we've heard since the 1950s and 60s, that if you start to give back, in one case it's a slippery slope. So there's this sort of where will it endism that seeks to argue for no action at all.
Alamayu's family renewed the request earlier this year around the time of King Charles's coronation. Like many others, Heather, they hope the new British monarch can help make a different decision.
Abby, I understand that some of the objects that were looted eventually were taken right across the Atlantic. So what about institutions here in North America? What are they saying on all of these points?
Well, the Royal Ontario Museum has an object from the Magdala siege. We reached out to the ROM for comment, and they said, while we are committed to full engagement in restitution matters, there is no restitution dialogue taking place. Now, some have argued that if it wasn't for the British troops who brought these valuables, including manuscripts, back to Britain, they would have been lost or destroyed. Some have also argued that these artifacts are actually better off today in Western museums. That argument did take a hit this past summer amid reports that about 2,000 objects in the care of the British Museum were stolen, missing, or damaged. Paul Boateng is a member of the House of Lords, and he was at the ceremony on Thursday. Here's what he had to say.
They were seized by force. That is the truth. That is why they are in the British Museum. The British Museum is the largest depository of stolen goods in the world. It is a depository of stolen goods. And they can't even look after the stolen goods they've got.
Now, there is a UK law that prevents the British Museum from disposing of its artifacts, but the conversation around returns and restitutions isn't going anywhere, says Chris Manjapra, a Canadian professor in Boston.
I think that the coming decade is going to be a decade to have very serious conversations at a nation-by-nation basis and at an international basis on this topic of reparations. Restitution for cultural objects that have been stolen, and also the giving back of land to Indigenous people whose lands were forcibly removed.
We did speak to the Ethiopian ambassador to the UK at the event. He says they are in talks with the British government because repatriating the prince's remains is important to Ethiopians, and they hope that their prince, Alamayu, can one day come home again, Heather.
Abby Kugathasan with an exclusive report from London this morning.